You're listening to KTAL FM 101.5 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. You're welcome to a new show, Science Let's Take a Look. I'm your host, Vince Gutschick, and I'll be with you here for an hour from noon each Tuesday. We'll explore science from history to current news, personalities to grand theories, things you can try at home, how science keeps us going, or not, famous misinterpretations, and more. I'd like to remind you that this is community radio supported by donors, and we hope that may include you. There's a donation page on our website where you can also stream all these shows live from anywhere in the universe as far as we know. It's at lccommunityradio.org. So let's start. One thing that was posted as a question on this site called ResearchGate, which is a loose collaboration of scientists, is why are plants green? And I felt that I could offer some really good answers to that. First of all, plants have to absorb energy in the part of the solar spectrum where there's a lot of energy, and that is just about where vision works for us. We describe that in terms of wavelength, and that's about 400 to 700 nanometers. Okay, that's billionths of a meter. Waves of light are very short, and that's not the thing that really is going to concern us at the moment. So, where do plants absorb light? Well, they leave out the green. That's why they are green. That means they're absorbing the red and the blue. So that has to do with the way that organic molecules absorb light and then help process it. Now I say organic molecule. It's something that basically contains carbon. That's one of the fundamental definitions to chemists of what constitutes an organic molecule. It's got to be an organic molecule because it has to be something that plants can make with their biochemistry, all based on carbon. All right, so there's lots of molecules that absorb light. As we know, there's so many different colors of organic compounds. Chlorophyll's green. Going back to what they're absorbing and not absorbing, they're absorbing the red and the blue. The red is what we call a transition from the ground state. Everything's resting, essentially, with some vibration and rotation of the molecule. It's up to the next excited singlet state, and we won't worry about what singlet means. The blue absorption is where the molecule jumps to an even higher energy state, the second excited singlet state. And that actually relaxes, it dumps some heat, dumps energy as heat, and reaches the first excited singlet state. Okay, so now we have a molecule that has some energy. What's it going to do with it? Now, if you look at most organic molecules, then that's making more heat. Some of them fluoresce. That's not all that common. So there's lots of ways that molecules can deal with that energy that they've absorbed from light. Chlorophyll is really rather unique. It doesn't tend to degrade that energy into heat. Otherwise, we wouldn't have very efficient photosynthesis. It also doesn't do what we call intersystem crossing. That's to a slightly lower energy state called a triplet, and that can be nasty because it can create what's called singlet oxygen, and that's a hazard in all living cells. So good for chlorophyll there. What else can it do? It can fluoresce, and you do see some fluorescence. You can actually see this neatly a couple of ways. If you have a living plant and you have a violet laser pointer, as I do, just shine it on the leaf. instead of a reflection that looks violet, you'll see one that looks pink. That's the mixture of some reflection of that violet plus the red chlorophyll fluorescence. Another way you can do it is grind up a leaf, use some solvent, extract the chlorophyll, and then shine any energetic light that's absorbed, a blue, violet laser, or whatever. And what you will see is red fluorescence coming out sideways. You've got a green solution in front of you, and now you've got red light coming out. And it's actually rather beautiful. So the other thing is chlorophyll is pretty good at bouncing its energy to another molecule, such as another chlorophyll molecule. Then this can move that energy around until it can reach what we call a reaction center in the photosynthetic unit of the plant. There it can start the first steps of capturing carbon dioxide and making sugars. Well, it needs water, of course, and so on. This is a rather unique set of properties that it captures energy well, it transfers energy well, it doesn't lose energy by just degrading it to heat. It doesn't tend to make any of these damaging triplet states. So, good for chlorophyll on that. Now, another part of the question was, why not absorb everything? Why not absorb in the green also? Now, some people have said that would be damaging because the leaves would get too hot. Okay, I'm going to jump into that. Well, plants already absorb in their leaves about 85% of the sunlight that falls on them. Adding another 15% wouldn't be an untoward burden for the leaves. But you still have to worry about how plants avoid getting too hot, the leaves, right? Well, there's lots of ways that leaves can lose energy. They can radiate the heat away. Everything that's above absolute zero, which means everything, is radiating what's called thermal energy, thermal infrared. Or actually, if you get hot enough, it gets as high as the visible in energy, and that's why our sun is so apparent to us. That's one way. Another way is to transfer energy by the molecules of air wafting over the leaf and taking away some of the heat. Of course, it can go the other way too. You can have a cool leaf, cooler than the air, and then that energy goes into the leaf and makes it warmer. But one of the major ways is cooling by evaporation of water. So leaves lose a lot of water, and it's the cost of doing business. If you're going to take up carbon dioxide, then you have to have pores opened in the leaves, and these pores are quite small, micrometers in diameter, and that also allows water inside the leaf to leave. Typically, a plant might lose several hundred molecules of water for every carbon dioxide that it brings in. There's no way around it. Carbon dioxide is not abundant in our air, although right now it's more abundant than we really need and want to have. But if you look at the history of plants the last 20 million years, they were dealing with lower amounts of carbon dioxide, maybe around 280 parts per million. We're now over 400. When I was born, it was 300. Didn't look alarming. Okay, but that's a separate topic right now. So the water that is lost takes away a lot of energy. It takes more energy to evaporate a molecule of water than almost anything you can think of. You take organic solvents, it's at least 4 times as much as that, because water has a lot of hydrogen bonds that loosely, so-called loosely, bond them to each other. So that means that there is an intrinsic water use efficiency of photosynthesis. Really might call it efficacy because they're not the same units, water and CO2 or energy and anything else. So what is this? What are the consequences for us as a species? Well, we raise plants as crops for food and other uses, fiber and so on, like timber. We have to devote a lot of water to raising those crops. We direct it to them, perhaps, or wait for rain. But we use 70% of all human-managed water supplies on a global basis, and pretty much the same in the U.S., to irrigate crops. Now, this has, you might say, political consequences. How are those farmers getting all that water so cheaply? And now we consumers are paying a fair price. We've got a really good bargain when you consider it. But anyway, that's always going to be true, that 70% of the water is going to be used. It's put on about 10% of the total crop area in the world, but it gives us 1/3 of all our crop yield because obviously irrigated crops are much more productive. So can we cut that back? Well, there's some things militating against it. The major thing is population growth. There are now over 7 billion people on Earth. Somebody pointed out that 45% of all people who have ever lived are alive right now. Population has been mushrooming. And the other thing is people are using plants in ways that we didn't originally. We're feeding a lot more to animals. You name it, chickens, beef animals, etc. And they convert anywhere from 1/3 to about 1/8 of the food value of crops into food value for us. So as people get more affluent, they have been over the years, there's more meat in the diet. There's more total demand for crop yield and therefore a lot of water use. So don't count on a reduction in the water use going for irrigation. There are people looking at various initiatives to ameliorate this. So where does that water come from? Well, you might say ultimately from precipitation. And that's true for most of the water that runs through the crops, the water that they transpire through their leaves. But a lot of it is groundwater. So that has been diverted underground. It basically percolates through soil and cracks and so on and ends up in what you might call bolsons, big storage reservoirs deep below the soil. And we're tapping those. Now, some of those bolsons, some of those aquifers are recharging. You get in a nice wet area, and it might rain enough and have enough connection to the aquifer for the water to move down that as we use it, it gets refilled. Now, there are a lot that aren't refilling. So here's a couple that are of concern. There's the Ogallala Reservoir that covers a lot of the middle U.S. states, Oklahoma, parts of New Mexico, Texas, etc. And we're depleting that. If you take a smaller example around Phoenix, Arizona, then you have so much depletion that the water table from which you have to draw the water, pump it up, went down to about 600 feet below the surface, and it's not worth pumping the water anymore. It's too expensive, and there's not that much left. Hatch in New Mexico, the Chile area, is facing the same thing. They're even considering a very, very deep aquifer to pump from, but we'll see how long we have Hatch Chile. A bigger area infecting many more people is the northern India aquifer. What do you call it? Probably not aquifer. Anyway, that has been being depleted at a remarkable rate. How do we know that? Well, there's classic measures where people go out and measure the soil moisture, they measure the depth to aquifers and so on. And what's been found is that on average it's been dropping, that is the depth of the water, by 3 to 4 centimeters per year. Well, that becomes an alarming amount when you consider how many more years we're trying to go, indefinitely we'd hope, but that aquifer isn't recharging, that groundwater. One of the interesting ways that was measured is by the GRACE experiment, GRACE, stands for Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment. So what is this? Well, it's a pair of satellites, and if you have ever read or seen the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, these look like Vogon spaceships. They're following each other, and I'm trying to remember how many kilometers apart. They're exchanging laser pulses back and forth, constantly measuring how far apart they are. So what does that tell us? Well, let's suppose there's an area that has more stuff down on the Earth. It could be a mountain range. It could be the groundwater. Well, if the lead satellite starts approaching that, it gets pulled forward a little bit, increasing the distance from the trailing satellite. Then, as it passes over, it gets pulled back, decreasing the distance. At the same time, the trailing one is being accelerated, further decreasing the distance. So it ends up with these two satellites bouncing back and forth, and the distance between them and their location tells us what's down there. They are so sensitive that they can tell you how much rain has happened over a significant area. It has to be probably several hundred kilometers, but it's still very sensitive. That is telling us that this aquifer, this groundwater supply in India, is being drawn down by about 18 cubic kilometers per year. That's an astounding number. So basically, if you took sort of the central area of Las Cruces, let's call it 18 square kilometers, that if you piled water 1,000 meters high, that is, about 3,300 feet, that would be the amount of water being extracted to grow crops there. So I'll close on that stuff about why plants are green, and we've sort of gone all over the map. We've gone from the spectrum for absorption of light, why chlorophyll is so great, why plants lose water and how that's helpful for their energy balance, and then how we've measured the amount of water being used on vast areas. So it's something like these long discourses you might have with friends, and you start talking about your vacation, and then you go to a video. Oh, and somehow it got turned over to highway repair. And after many, many changes, you might be discussing the price of eggs in Bulgaria. So this can be amusing. It can be confusing. Let me know if you enjoyed this kind of meandering trip. Let me tell you that you can text me at my phone number, 575-571-2269, or you can email me. I've got a couple of emails. Simple one, vince.gutschick@gmail.com. That's GUTSCHICK. I'm not taking phone calls on the air because that gets a little tricky. It can also be that it needs screening of the call. So somebody will call in and say, "Oh, do you sell fish food?" "Oh, sorry, wrong number." And that gets to be a disruption. But anyway, I'm happy to hear your comments, your suggestions. And meanwhile, I'm going to take a break and return you to the program. So we'll see you in